And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you joined us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap between fitness and wellness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based information in the health sciences in the effort to get fitness and wellness professionals on the healthcare continuum. And in episode 48, to do that, we're joined by Becky Searls. And Becky is a very interesting podcast guest because she's new to the fitness industry as a personal trainer. She comes from the education world, teaching Spanish at the high school level, and transitioned into personal training after a sabbatical period that she took from her teaching. And this conversation is going to be around an article that I came across on Medium that she wrote that was 10 lessons from my first month's coaching as a personal trainer. And as I said to her in the podcast, even though this was from her first months as a personal trainer, I feel like these lessons are applicable in your 100th, your 200th, or your 500th month as a personal trainer. So many pearls of wisdom here in this conversation. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about suspending your ego and being curious and listening more and talking less. Lots of amazing insights. And I think Becky's perspective is interesting because she comes to our field after having been an established professional in another field. I think this is a great conversation for those of you that are just getting into fitness as a professional and as a personal trainer, but also for those of us who've been in the field for a while. I know I certainly learned a number of things during this episode. Any additional information that we'd like to share can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 48. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Becky Searls. We're so delighted to be joined today by Becky Searls. Becky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here, Mike.
So I'm really excited for this discussion. You come to the Wellness Paradox by way of my good friend and former Wellness Paradox guest, Jeff Young, who you've connected with through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And the reason I'm so interested in this discussion with you is two parts. One, you wrote an amazing Medium article that we're going to dive into that I thought was very, very insightful, but also you're a second career fitness professional. This is not necessarily what you went to college for and then went right out in the workforce. And so I'm interested to talk about that because I think there are a lot of people that are interested in it, but that's probably our starting point. So just give us a little bit of context on your background from previous career to what led you to your current career. And then we'll dive into this great article.
Absolutely. I would be happy to share that. So my first career was as a K-12 teacher, and I was in the education industry for 15 years. I taught Spanish at the high school level for 7 years and then transitioned to middle school for about 5 years. Then I had an amazing opportunity to take a sabbatical. And during this sabbatical, I kind of piggybacked along traveling with my husband, who's a software engineer and speaks internationally. So I ended up kind of pitching a project to my school district that I would visit schools all around the world and try to connect our students to students internationally and kind of do like a global pen pals thing. Plus, selfishly, I just got to travel a lot and enjoy investigating education systems around the world. So I think that was my first input, that there was more to what I was doing. And I was kind of doing that typical thing of like having this really high stress sponge-like day job that will kind of suck you dry and like fitting fitness in at 4 a.m. or 8 p.m. And that being what I really enjoyed, and repeating that cycle and just burning out, kind of burning the candle on both ends. So when I went back to the classroom after my sabbatical, best year I ever had, incorporated all these different ideas, but kind of was like, I think that there's something else for me. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to give myself time and space to figure it out. So after 1 year back in the classroom, resigned from that position, took a year to kind of enjoy doing the things I enjoyed doing, which actually led to moving to Japan for a year to teach English. I do have a master's degree in TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. So we lived there for a year. We moved there August 2019, and then had 6 amazing months of travel and enjoyment before COVID started in February over there of 2020. And I don't know if you remember, but Japan kind of led the world with students staying home from school when Prime Minister Abe kind of gently suggested it, and overnight it happened. So I was staying home or just having more free time and doing what I loved, which was working out, and friends were kind of asking me for help. And I was designing things for them that was based on kind of like my best guess and internet research, and kind of realized, this internet research could be more structured. I could get certified in this, and it actually would be like teaching, but it would be teaching what I really love spending my time and energy on. So that led to a lot of, researching all the certifications and trying to choose the best one, which landed me with NSCA, which I feel like is one of the most evidence-based programs out there. And when I got home from Japan, took about 6 to 9 months to kind of self-study to the NSCA CPT. And from there, just did a really thorough job search and interviewed at maybe 4 to 5 different places. I'm in Orlando, Florida. So ended up choosing one right up the road. But it's an interesting question, because at so many points, there were so many ways where I had to kind of drop my ego, because within education, I had 15 years of experience. I had tenure. I had a master's degree. I had traveled internationally, taught internationally. And yet at every point when I really checked in with myself, all I wanted to do was work out and help other people work out and build relationships and kind of talk about all aspects of health, from mental to emotional well-being too. So to me, it was really worth it to take that risk and investigate. And really, like I said, I still feel like a teacher, but I just get to teach a population that's highly engaged and a topic that is really close to my heart.
I love it. That's such a great story. And yes, I've been in commercial fitness now for 23 years. And I can tell you, I've always felt the best trainers are indeed teachers. And it's interesting you bring that background in. Before we get into the article, I'm curious, because it's rare that I have the opportunity to pick someone's brain on this particular question. You said you did searching for a lot of different certifications and you landed on NSCA. Now, in the interest of not making this a commercial for NSCA, I'm curious what caused you to choose them. You said they were evidence-based, but I would suspect that it's more than that. So give us a little insight into that decision.
That's a good one. I got kind of down to NSCA and NASM. Okay. And I do think NASM is great. I have a lot of colleagues that have NASM. It's obviously a big one in the industry. It's well regarded. It's, everybody kind of knows NASM. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. But when I kind of, they had like a little trial that you could try with their materials. And then this is maybe a counterintuitive reason to choose NSCA, but NSCA really didn't. It was very like, spend a couple $100s on a textbook and struggle to figure out, like, is this it? Am I just studying this textbook and maybe like networking with real humans who have experience in the industry? And something about that spoke volumes to me versus like getting email after email after email of kind of inbound marketing and what felt kind of like upsells. And I don't think sales is necessarily in opposition to good programming or curriculum, but maybe coming from my public education background, I liked the disassociation of like NSCA wasn't trying to get me. I had to be like, how does this work, NSCA? And I had to like find people who had NSCA certification. And another thing, I guess, that I will say is I had gotten far enough in my own exercise that I was understanding progressive overload, not quite periodization, but I was using progressive overload, and all of my coaches that were preaching that were NSCA.
Got it.
So that spoke volumes to me too, that the coaches I was trusting for my own personal programming preferences were all NSCA. When I asked them, they were pretty opinionated. That, of course, a little biased too, maybe, but they were like, that one, do that one for sure.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that insight. One One more question on the certification process, again, because I'm sure there are some people that are listening to this that are not necessarily of an exercise science academic background. Just touch on really quick the process of getting certified through the NSCA, a more evidence-based organization, not having that academic background in the field. Do you have any tips or thoughts for people that are maybe approaching it from the same perspective as you?
Yeah, I would definitely say, almost treat it like you're taking a college class and kind of reverse engineer the process. So if you have in mind, like when you would like to be certified, which I nebulously did, I should have had it more concrete up front looking back, but I kind of thought like, I'll give myself like a year because I don't have the anatomy and physiology undergrad that a lot of people have. I didn't do exercise science. So that's probably going to be challenging for me. And it was the first like 2 to 3 chapters. I was in the weeds and like looking up, sarcomeres and all kinds of things to try to understand. And eventually kind of learned like, that's not really the stuff that you need to like have a conversation with a client about. So it works out, but you need it for the certification, not for every part of the certification, but for that test, you kind of have to work backwards. I would also say be really careful about the study materials you acquire, because I totally bought a study guide through, I forget the name of the company, but it looked very legit. It looked like it was an NSCA approved curriculum, like study guide. And I got probably 6 months into studying and then was going to register for my test and kind of realized, I think it was, should I say the name if I remembered?
Sure.
I think it was called Training Academy.
Okay.
And for all I know, their stuff is great for like NASM. They do a lot of certs and provide study guides. I think it was Training Academy. And I realized, oh, this is not like an NSCA approved thing. When I contacted NSCA, they were like, they're not allowed to use our logo. None of these people that they list as clients are certified trainers with us. We're actually pursuing litigation against them for using that information. So then I was kind of like, oh no, what have I been studying? Start over, which it wasn't quite. It was still in the same vein, but just be careful with that. Cause I literally like issued them a charge back through Amex and got my money back. And then kind of like stuck to the, buyer beware.
Buyer beware for sure. Wow. That's
for sure.
That's good. That's good information to know. And I'm glad you actually said the name. So, well, that's, again, I love looking under the hood of that process for you, but I really want to get to this article because this article, it's a roundabout way, all Wellness Paradox podcast guests all over the place here. Jeff reached out to me because Jeff Young, who's former podcast guest, reached out to me because I posted from Tony Moreno, who's a former Wellness Paradox podcast guest, about a speaker for an NSCA event in Michigan. And this email was sent back to me from you and Jeff that I had this article linked in it called 10 Lessons from My First Month's Coaching as a Personal Trainer. And I love this article. I thought it was so insightful. And I will say that it's an article that even though it was from your first month's coaching as a personal trainer, I feel like this article has application in your 100th month of coaching as a personal trainer. I thought it was really, really insightful. And 10 lessons are a lot to talk about in the next 30 minutes of this episode, but I'd like you to unpack the article for us a little bit. Maybe a great way to start would just be high level, what the 10 lessons were. And then maybe we can dive in on some of the ones that you thought were particularly important, but I'll let you teach on this because you wrote the article. So whatever you think is the most appropriate way to get this information out there to our audience, go for it.
Awesome. Yeah. So why don't I list them? And then if one kind of piques your curiosity, I can dive deeper into that one. Sound good?
Perfect. Yes, that's great.
Okay, good. So the first one I kind of already touched on with switching careers, but my first lesson was check your ego and give yourself full permission to be a beginner. That's hard when you're career changing and you already feel kind of like, I know things as an adult, but not in this industry. Yeah. Just training is specific, the adaptation is specific to the training. Skills transferred for sure from education, but there was also a lot to learn. So check your ego, be a beginner. 2 is one I struggle with to this day, which may not surprise you given I'm on a podcast talking a lot, but listen more than you speak. in education, there's a saying I touched on in the blog post that the person doing the talking is the person learning. But I kind of think it's the opposite in personal training, because I think if you're listening, you're not just taking in what people are saying, but kind of their unexpressed body language and context and everything. And you can learn a lot from talking less. 3 was keep it simple with the kind of team training group workouts. And in there, I think I kind of touched on, maybe because of how evidence-based and progressive overload and periodization approach NSCA is, I had a lot of kind of mental judgment around team workouts and group workouts, because I wanted to like apply all of those principles over. And some of them can be applied, but some of them I think are, you have, 10 people with 10 different training statuses and injury backgrounds and goals. And some of it just can't really be applied over there, and it doesn't need to be judged. It just is a different beast, which is fine.
Yep.
4 was trust your gut when it comes to your one-on-one training and programming. And that was kind of like, do the evidence-based thing, do the, phases of periodization, and make sure you're progressively overloading and stick to the basic movement patterns and their variations. And even if you see, colleagues doing other things that you're kind of like, that looks cool, but also what is the point there? Kind of, stick to your gut. You can try new things. You can do what your client enjoys, but kind of, if you feel like, that's evidence-based and you're seeing it work, you don't got to go crazy and have a circus. 5 was working out is not the same thing as training progressively, and that's okay, which I kind of touched on. The group fitness thing is a little different than the one-on-one approach. Again, my like new motto is curiosity, not judgment. But I will say, I feel like one-on-one should be clients coming to the gym with customized SMART goals, progressively overloading through periodization, kind of switching it up every 4 to 6 weeks into a new phase so that they don't plateau and it's safe and effective. And if and when I don't see that happening, I feel a little bit of judgment inside. So I have to work on that with myself. 6 was more about like operations in the gym, about like documenting, speaking up, and bringing your best. Because if you have different situations arising that are kind of impacting your ability to perform at work, I think a lot of times humans have a tendency to assume it's them when it might not be. It might be something external to you. And I have this experience with technology all the time. My husband's a software engineer, and I'm always like, I can't figure this out. And he's like, it's not you, it's software. Software is terrible. It's broken. And I've learned to kind of externalize that over time. I think in the gym, if you're having a weird interaction with a client or a colleague or just like a situation, you should document that. You should write that down. And if that's a pattern, you should bring it, not laterally gossipy, but you should bring it to like the manager, because it's probably a systemic problematic issue that could be resolved if you speak up. So document. I did bring that over from teaching, lots of documentation and teaching. 7 is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is, I think, has a lot of lessons across the board. 8, just be there. So this was something I learned from a coach early on. I did a class with him, and he would just come and like stand behind me and not say anything. And I would be on the assault bike and just suddenly like go all out because he was standing there silently. So I learned a lot about, again, talking less, just being there. 9, I've touched on be curious, reserve judgment, and plant seeds to maybe kind of unlearn some problematic tropes from the fitness industry with clients. And then finally, 10, find some balance for yourself as a trainer and have some boundaries to avoid just overwork.
Yeah, those are all such great lessons that I'm amazed that you realize them in such a short period of time, because I know many professionals in our field that after being in the field for, a couple of decades, some of those lessons would elude them. I think I'm less interested to talk about the programming related lessons, and I'm more interested to talk about some of the other things that you mentioned. And I want to start with the first one, which is the ego suspension concept. And the reason that I want to start with this is I don't think this is just applicable to someone who is new to the field. I find every day that if I'm not very aware of my ego, it absolutely gets in my way. And again, I've been doing this for, 23 years. I bet our friend Jeff would probably say the same thing, as well as a bunch of other people. So just teach on that for a little bit, certainly from the perspective of a beginner, but also extend that to just the concept of beginner's mindset and why you think that's so advantageous for fitness professionals in general.
Yeah, I just, even thinking of any client who walks into the gym, I can't imagine anything more valuable than a trainer remembering that they're a beginner and remembering, of course, like physically, this is going to be challenging, but more so initially, mentally, emotionally, it was probably terrifying for them to walk into the gym. And then hopefully they've come across somebody who's a friendly face, who's welcoming, but then they get into a workout. And like, to you, it's old hat. You're just like, here we go. Let's do the thing. Music going. Woo, woo, woo. And they're probably like, can I do this? Sure. And if I can't, am I going to feel embarrassed? Am I going to fall on my face? Am I going to be sore for 4 days? Am I going to hurt myself? So I think one of the biggest things with beginner's mindset is remembering it, not just for yourself, that you always have something to learn, but for your client, you have to provide regressions. You have to provide progressions. And I really think the language we use matters a lot as coaches too, to be able to say something not like, no pain, no gain, but more so like, check in with yourself. What is your form like? What do you need today? If you need to go down to your knees for a couple reps of those push-ups to maintain perfect form, do that. And then hop back to your toes when you're ready. Like, encouraging people to own their experience and not just like plow through and then get a rotator cuff injury because they feel shame about a modified version or regression, I think is so, so important.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you more about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has been absolutely devastating for the fitness industry, with upwards of 1/3 of our clubs closing nationally on a permanent basis. One of the few stabilizing forces during this very tumultuous period of time has been IHRSA, the Global Trade Association for the health and fitness industry. On my crusade to make fitness professionals part of our healthcare continuum, the work that IHRSA is doing is absolutely vital. They provide advocacy and lobbying support at both the federal and the state level. They support state alliances in many ways, and they also provide resources and best practices to club owners, operators, and individual fitness professionals. Indeed, if we are truly going to become part of the healthcare continuum, we must speak with one unified voice. We must have best practices that we implement, and we must come together as an industry to ensure the public, the medical community, and lawmakers hear our message loud and clear, that movement is medicine and it is essential. That is the work that IHRSA is doing. They've recently revamped their membership structure, allowing large clubs, small clubs, boutiques, and individual professionals to join the organization for an appropriate price that allows them to have access to all of these many great resources and allows us to unify and amplify our voice as an industry. For more information on the amazing work that IHRSA is doing, go to their website, IHRSA.org. That's IHRSA.org, IHRSA.org, to look in a little bit further into the work IHRSA is doing to unify our industry, to move us closer to being a part of that healthcare continuum. Now back to today's episode. Yeah, that's great. And I like the perspective there is, hey, it's not just your mindset, it's also being aware of the client's mindset. And again, I think language is incredibly, incredibly important. I think we as fitness professionals have a language that we don't question, but that language can be off-putting to many people that don't engage with our industry. Like for us, no pain, no gain. Like I want to go into the gym and I kind of want to crush myself. I don't know. Like, are you the same way? You're probably like,
yeah. If I'm in a group fitness class, I'm like, woohoo, go hard. Yeah. But when I was rehabbing from my hernia repair, I needed to not hear that because I would get caught up in the music in the moment. And then afterwards be like, nope, shouldn't have done that. So you just never know. Like with my staff, even I had to occasionally, when I was experiencing onboarding and trying classes and stuff, I had to be like, guys, do I look like a person who can't do a jumping jack?
Yeah.
And they were like, no. And I was like, well, I can't right now.
Yeah.
My pelvic floor is not up for that. So
Yeah.
you can't assume anything based on what a person looks like, based on maybe, oh, well, they're fit or whatever. You just don't know what they're bringing with them. Or maybe it's just emotional. Maybe it's just mental and they're just not up for it that day. That doesn't mean you don't make it challenging, but I think you definitely want to use language that's inclusive, that gives permission, because even just fitness professionals day to day, we need and want something different.
Yeah. And that leads me into the next lesson that I thought was particularly insightful, because I think it results in exactly what you're talking about, is this concept of listening more than you talk. And when I started my career, I often think that I talked a lot, not because I wanted to convince the client that I knew what I was talking about, but I wanted to convince myself I knew what I was talking about. So, and I still think sometimes I do that. I'm curious, A, what led you to this? And then B, more importantly, how you actually implement that, because it's hard, because we want to talk, again, especially when you're early in your career and you're trying to prove to yourself, you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. It's a constant challenge. I will not lie. I've always been a chatterbox, period.
Mm-hmm.
And then I agree, when you're new, you're kind of like convincing yourself a little bit of imposter syndrome, as
Mm-hmm.
well as trying to convey to a client, like, I know what's going on here. It was even, gently suggested to me by a well-meaning manager who I have all the respect in the world for, that with my first client, that I should, not let them know that I was new, and like kind of put out the idea that like I've been doing this for a long time. And I was kind of like, I don't feel like that's right. I don't necessarily need to be like, hello, you are my first client ever. But I did feel like there should be some just authentic nuance, and like let it come out as it comes out, and let them know I'm learning along with them, and seek feedback and have a growth mindset. So I'm always learning along with that, and would love ideas from you as well. But how I tend to implement it is asking a lot of questions. Again, that kind of mantra of curiosity, not judgment. I like to do a lot of inquiry with my clients, and along with my personal training certification, I'm also a mindfulness-based behavior change facilitator in training. So I'm getting a lot of practice through that program in how to engage in mindful-based inquiry, to just kind of ask questions. And I like it because it moves away a lot from like, I have the solution, what is your problem? Let me give you advice, towards, let me ask you a question, understand your thinking, and kind of either directly or subconsciously plant the seed and message that you have all the wisdom inside of you to solve your own problem. I'm just a guide on the side to help you uncover the wisdom you already have.
I love it. That's great. I was wondering where your coaching skills component came from this, because for the NSCA, for as great of a job as they do talking about programming and prescriptive nuts and bolts, they don't really spend a lot of time on those coaching skills. And that's not what you would expect to get for them. So you've gone outside of that curriculum to start to foster this skill set elsewhere. And say again, the vehicle that you're doing that through, mindfulness, what was that?
So it's the kind of field, I guess, it's kind of a developing field, is mindfulness. And then within that, mindfulness-based behavior change. So probably similar to just when within the fitness industry, when people talk behavior change and how that's like a long-term process and habit change and all of that, but then kind of doing that through the vehicle of mindfulness, which is usually defined as just kind of being present in the moment and coming back to your embodied experience, which I find is like such a beautiful combination for training, because, especially at the end of like a one-on-one session, when they've worked really hard and we're cooling down, and I get them all the way down to lying on the mat and they're just eyes closed, breathing. It's the perfect opportunity to have them come back to their body and have them mentally and emotionally reflect on, how do you feel now? How did you feel before you walked in today? Is this better? let's choose this more often. And also let's do a little breathing practice right now so that you have this strategy for when you inevitably walk off the mat, walk in your door at home, and your 3-year-old has made a mess. Like, let's have that strategy. Let's have that tool in our toolkit, not just the physical workout, but the mental, emotional coping strategy for just like daily stressors that come up. So
yeah, that is spectacular. And there's a couple things that I want to point out there and maybe make some connections on. One is clearly this growth mindset that you have towards your craft. It's you got your certification, and there are a lot of fitness professionals that get that, and then that's it. Like, that's what they have. They do their CECs every 2 or 3 years, but you've started to expand and realized where some of the gaps are, which I think is incredibly insightful. But I also want to tie it back to some other guests we've had on the podcast before. And this is very similar to concepts that are talked about by Margaret Moore and her team over at Well Coaches, which she was one of our early guests. John Evans, who we recently had on, who we would affectionately call an actitioner. This is ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, or acceptance commitment training.
Yeah.
That's a mindfulness based form of behavior change. So a lot of commonality between those elements in here, which I think is very, very interesting. And this is going to lead me kind of to the last real thing that I want to dive into of the lessons that you provide in the article was this concept of curiosity, not judgment. And I think it's such an important concept for our own personal well-being, but also for that of our clients, because I think it becomes very easy for us to kind of naturally judge someone who's out of shape or overweight. And we start to tell ourselves a story around that, and that completely colors the situation. So I'm curious how you apply this. I am curious, no pun intended, how you apply this principle of curiosity, not judgment, both to your interactions with your clients, but also just in your own mind to make sure you maintain good mental health as you forge this path in a new career.
Yeah, I think curiosity is a superpower. If I think the brain is always kind of judging because it's always trying to look at things and find patterns and find meaning. But if you can kind of recognize like, okay, brain, thanks. You're trying to maybe protect me or something evolutionarily, but also I can choose my thoughts, and I choose to look at this person and know, just like I am a very complex person with a complex history and a complex set of circumstances, they are too. And I don't know what I don't know. So I really am big on check-ins with clients, whether that's like the initial intake that I have like a very extensive survey that I send them with everything from like attitudinal factors to the PAR-Q to their aesthetic goals, if any, which by the way, I like to, again, be careful with language on, because I think that that's a very problematic area in our industry. So getting towards more of like body neutrality rather than planting potentially problematic ideas in clients' minds, whether that's with relationship with food or body image, I think is really important. But yeah, I do a really extensive intake survey, and then I do this goal setting, I guess, modality that I call, well, I didn't come up with it. I should give credit. It was through a Hidden Brain podcast episode that I found this, but it was from NPR, I believe. It's called WHOOP, and it's an evidence-based goal setting strategy. So the W of WHOOP stands for wish. And I asked my clients, what is your biggest wish this month for your health and well-being? Could be mental, could be emotional, could be physical, could be one of each. Of that wish, how would the next O of WHOOP is outcome. What would the best outcome of achieving that wish be? How would that make you feel? And get them to really like think about and feel what that outcome would be. And then the next O is obstacle. This is always the one where they get a little stuck, because they say, okay, well, why isn't that happening now? What is the obstacle to fulfilling that wish? And it can't be external. It has to be internal, because it's so easy to say, work gets busy or my kids or whatever, but and even those are okay as long as they can make it internal, which almost always becomes something like my thoughts and feelings about parenting, or my thoughts and feelings about my stress level and job. And they kind of realize, oh, that's in me. I can work on that. And then that gives them permission and ownership to the P of Whoop is plan. So the person who made Whoop is, I believe, German. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is a very European mindset, but she was saying, I feel like people make goals and then they never accomplish them. It's like they make the goal and mentally they're like, check, did it, but they didn't. So she has this if-then plan where you think of all the obstacles that could come up and then you say, okay, if my kids are stressing me out, then what's the plan? What are you going to do? What's a thought you can think? What's an action you can take in that moment? And that really helps so that as we go through the month and I check in on, okay, so this was your wish. You said you wanted to pack your lunch 3 days a week. Is that happening? Oh, it's not. Okay. So if that's not happening, then what was your plan? Is that realistic? Is that happening? And then we try to make whatever their Whoop goal is smart. So we try to make it specific. We try to make it measurable. We try to make it actionable, realistic, and time bound. So kind of tying in the SMART goal methodology as well. And then we do 4 weeks, usually maybe up to 6 weeks of the phase of their training. And I kind of show them week 1 to week 4, their gains, which is always fun physically, but then we do another check-in mentally and I send another survey, we sit down, we make another Whoop goal. So I think that's a big part of curiosity, is just really giving them permission, first of all, to even wonder, what do I want? Because a lot of times we just start with something very basic, like I want to lose weight, or I want to feel better, or my doctor says I have high blood pressure. But to actually get under the hood of that, those conversations almost always end up with, I want to be alive for my grandchildren. Mm-hmm. I want to be here for my wife. I want to be proud of myself when I look in the mirror. And it's not actually about what the initial thing was. Kind of like, again, with the talking less, listening more, they may say something, but then you see their body language or you see their facial expression and you realize, oh, there's an unexpressed need here too. So I think this is just a really great way of both like forcing myself to listen to them by having this as a check-in, but then giving them permission to do that as well.
I absolutely love the framework. And NPR Hidden Brain is also a great podcast in general for anyone who can find another podcast to listen to in addition to this one, of course. But yeah, I love the framework. And I also love what you said there about curiosity, really allowing you to get to those deeper layers of what someone's looking to achieve, because just naturally the monetization in our industry is around more extrinsic things, weight loss or performance or injury rehab, but it's always so much deeper. And I say this all the time. People give up on weight loss goals left and right, but it's much harder to give up on the goal of, hey, I want to be around to see my grandchild graduate high school. That's a very, very different goal to give up on. So I think, the framework that you use for curiosity is important. And I think it's such a great lesson for all of our listeners. And again, the article I think is really, really impactful. And we're going to link up to it in the show notes so everyone has a chance to check that article out. Definitely recommend the read. Before I get to my last couple of questions here, I'm curious for your perspective on what excites you about our industry right now. We're coming out of the pandemic. It's a rough time. I'm here in Michigan, where over a third of health and fitness clubs have closed as a result of the pandemic. We were one of the longer closures in the country here in Michigan. And it's a tough time for our industry. Maybe not quite as tough in Florida, but still tough. What excites you right now for what you see in our industry?
So that's a good question, because I'll couch this in a little context for you, but I took a 3-year break from social media because I just felt like I needed it. For one thing, I would encourage anybody to take a good break. I read the book Digital Minimalism a few years ago by Cal Newport and was like, yeah, I do want to be that person who's not like whipping out my phone while standing in line to buy my groceries. That'd be neat to just take a breath. So long term, that probably led to the mindfulness stuff and maybe in a weird way, personal training. But I think being off of social media was very grounding for me and very it probably is a big part of why I ended up doing an NSCA instead of maybe something a little flashier and more Insta worthy. But I feel like, and I don't know if this is true or if this is my experience from having been off of Instagram until recently, I feel like the fitness industry is maturing a little bit, and that at least NSCA, I know, is going to require higher education to have the certification soon for, at least for CSCS. I'm not sure about CPT, which I think will only elevate the standard of care in the practice in the field, which is great. I mean, even in education, I touched on this in my blog post, there are wonderful teachers. There are like, teachers just there to collect a paycheck. And then there are some pretty problematic educators out there. And that's in a field where you have to have a bachelor's degree. And often people have a master's degree. And there's still a lot of not great teaching and learning going on in that field. So I have to think our field will only benefit from increased education and maybe a little bit higher barrier of entry to enter the field. And then I do feel like as it matures, it's getting a little bit more evidence-based. But again, that might be only my experience from what I'm exposing myself to intentionally. I'm not looking for workouts on Instagram, for example. I'm, networking with professionals at conferences and engaging in special interest group dialogue on a weekly basis, and finding people with more experience like yourself, or some people local to Florida or Jeff Young, and trying to learn from people who have more experience than me, who are like real humans that I've had the opportunity to meet and engage with. So that could just be partly my experience, but I hope that's where the industry is going, that it's maturing, that it's getting a little bit more evidence-based, that there's a little bit of a higher barrier of entry, not in like you can't access this dream if you want this, but in a you have to learn and educate yourself and know enough to not harm your clients.
Yeah, and I would concur. I think our industry is maturing greatly from being on social media for these past 3 years. I've definitely seen a maturation of the industry, and that excites me as well. So I'm happy to hear that you've also observed that. Becky, where can people go if they want to find out more about you and all the stuff you're doing?
Yeah. So I am still kind of new in the industry, so I don't have a very fancy online presence, but I have blogged for years, and I'm back on Instagram newly trying to figure that out. So the Medium article, you can find my Medium blog at medium.com/@Becky Joy. Joy is my middle name. And then on Instagram, I'm at Becky Joy. And you can email me at beckyjoy@gmail.com. So it's at least all the same everywhere. Becky Joy, Becky Joy, Becky Joy.
That seems very appropriate for you. I didn't know that was your middle name. I just thought that you're just a super happy person, but it works in both respects. We'll link up to all that in the show notes page, so people can reach out. And I would highly encourage any of you that are out there that heard this conversation and it resonates with you. Becky's great. I basically reached out to her after this email connection with Jeff, and she said, "Sure, I'll be happy to be on your podcast." So I'm sure you would enjoy connecting with her. Before we go, I have the one question that I always end the podcast on, which relates to my thesis for the podcast. And I'm very interested in your perspective, because you're new to our industry. Sometimes when you ask this question to people who've been in the industry for a while, they're a little disenfranchised with the concept. But for me, the wellness paradox is the trust, communication, and interaction gap between fitness professionals and medical professionals. And that's an important gap for us to be able to close off if we're going to really improve population health in this country. If you had one piece of advice from your limited experience in the field so far as how you think fitness professionals could start to close off that gap, what would that one piece of advice be?
Yeah, I love that image in mind. What comes to mind visually is like the fitness industry is like one cliff, and then the medical industry is another cliff, and there's this like chasm in between. So I think if I had one piece of advice, it would be to maybe through curious communication and not judgment and assumption, because we all know what assuming does, be a bridge, because there's so many little pitfalls to fall into between those two cliffs. And sometimes it's maybe through assumption or through judgment or just miscommunication. But if you can just kind of, again, maybe through inquiry, no, there's a solution here. There's a way to really serve clients well and not assume we know what they want or need, but be a resource on both ends and be a bridge to connect the two. I think that that would go a long, long way, just assuming positive intent from one another, assuming that the medical side has incredible knowledge and so much education and background, and then assuming that fitness professionals have the best interests at heart for those clients, and that they understand that behavior change takes a really long time that clients can't get through 8 PT sessions. Mm-hmm. So there can be a really beneficial bridge there if you are curiously communicating along the way.
I love that we were able to tie in curiosity as we end our conversation. Becky, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Becky as much as I did. If you found it insightful and valuable, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares really do make a difference for us. Any additional information we'd like to share with you can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 48. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Those reviews make a massive difference for us in terms of getting our message out there. Until we chat again next week, please be well.